The first few ideas from Michael Porter in this lesson are focused on the external environment. So in this discussion, I will provide some ideas that are tangential to Porter, but help to put his ideas into context. There's an economic and industry view of the environment, as well as a strategy and managerial view. The secret of success is to do the common things uncommonly well. But, as Viktor Frankl shares here, don't aim at success. The more you aim at it, the more you're going to miss it. Frankl was both a neurologist and psychiatrist, but his notoriety came from having been in World War II and having been incarcerated in a Nazi concentration camp. Following that experience, he wrote the book entitled Man's Search for Meaning, which is considered to be one of the 10 most influential books in the United States, according to the Library of Congress. I mention this because I believe it relates to Porter's ideas about competition and strategy. You'll explore this in one of this week's discussion questions. Even if you're not an Alabama fan, you should be able to appreciate Nick Saban's success. This quote, too, relates to Porter's ideas. It's not really about what you want. It's about what you are willing to do to get it. If you were able to watch the Starbucks video with Charles Schultz in the last lesson, he stated that growth is not a strategy. Growth is certainly something that all businesses desire, but it is what they are willing to do to grow that is important. Here's an outline of what will follow. Here are some of the discussion questions we will answer in the discussion forums during the upcoming lesson. And now we'll address the external environment in more detail. Bateson is an information theorist, and he came up with a provocative statement. What we mean by information is a difference that makes a difference. So as we look at the idea of an industry around us, the things we choose to pay attention to are important. The following explains a little bit about why we would want to analyze the industry in terms of levels of aggregation, economic phenomena, industry phenomena, and then I'll mention a little bit about the movie A Beautiful Mind, which talks about Nash equilibrium. Aggregation in science. If you are interested in biology and medicine, we must concern ourselves as composed of cells, tissues, organs, and so forth. But notice the differentiation that occurs when we get into social science. Here we are concerned with levels of aggregation such as groups and organizations all the way to the industry level. Porter's concern with the industry is a concern with the organizations within that industry. Thus, the five forces model has a lot to do with what the other organizations similar to yours are doing. In the world of medicine, we would disaggregate to study the phenomenon. In the world of social science, we would aggregate in order to study the phenomenon. John Nash was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics. His life is depicted in the movie A Beautiful Mind, starring Russell Crowe. Nash's breakthrough idea ran counter to the prevailing wisdom of Adam Smith, stating that individual ambition serves the common good. Nash agreed that Adam Smith was correct, but only to a point. Nash added that the individual must also do what is in the best interest of the group. So when we talk about Porter's five forces, we want to recognize that we must consider what other companies in an industry are doing in order for us to behave appropriately. In the extreme, it is possible for a company to destroy an industry through behavior that's not in everyone's interest. Thus, we have antitrust laws and the goal of preventing monopolies. If we look at this from the standpoint of investing, ask yourself, what is it that you would want to know not only about a company, but the industry within which they operate before you would be willing to invest? Here is some information that you would find valuable. Notice that some of it is generated by the industry and other information comes from individual companies. This picture depicts the idea of different environments. There's a macro environment out there with general economic conditions and so forth, and there's the industry environment, which is where Porter's five forces model applies. This is one depiction of Porter's five forces model. This model can appear in various forms because the original depiction is copyrighted. We will cover this in our discussion questions as well as through your reading. Here are some implications of the model. The idea is to characterize the competitive environment. In this case, we're saying it's unattractive when rivalry is vigorous, entry barriers are low, and so forth. In contrast, ideal environments exist when rivalry is moderate, entry barriers are high, and so forth. All of that is subject to change, and here's a list of major factors that drive industry change. There could be other ones as conditions change over time, but this captures some significant major categories. Now let us think about the idea that it is not only the economy, but the individual view of managers that will drive behavior. The economic view is that a company is at the mercy of the economy, and there's not much that a manager can do to impact firm performance. All managers really do is acquire resources and assets to operate within that industry. And again, that's an economic resource-based perspective. We mentioned Carl Weick in a previous lesson regarding strategic plans. Weick is credited with writing on the concept of enactment, or enacted environments in our case. In simple terms, enactment is taking action based upon our perceptions. We can conceive of three environments: objective environments, the facts we can draw from what we see, perceived environments, and enacted environments. This slide helps us to see the concept in a little more detail. The left-hand column or side is intended to depict what exists in the environment. The right-hand side or column depicts what is inside the mind of the strategist or a person. Now let us look from left to right. The first row includes the idea of an objective environment, which is characterized in this depiction by accurate observation. So what we are saying is that the strategic manager looks at the environment and the vision in his or her mind is exactly the same. Thus, the depiction of geometric shapes is the same. Next, we move to the row labeled perceived environments. And in this case, we see that there is an inaccurate observation or misunderstanding of the environment. Thus, the shapes in the mind of the manager do not match what is actually in the environment. Finally, we have the notion of enacted environments. Notice that the environment is depicted as random. There are no clean, clear shapes. However, in the mind of the strategist, shapes exist. Carl Weick and others say that we as human beings have the capability to organize and interpret the world around us in particular ways, even if the world presents ambiguous events or data. So when it comes to strategy, there is no one idea or set of ideas waiting to be plucked from a tree like a piece of fruit. There are things we can know, like the price or cost of something or the interest rate at a point in time. We can assess to some degree the competitive position of firms in an industry, but this is subject to some judgment and possible inaccuracy. And finally, there's the idea of industry opportunity, which means that diligent strategists create their opportunities through hard work leading to innovation. The iPhone comes to mind here. One of the tools we can use to get a better picture of where we stand in a particular industry or environment is strategic mapping. The map is comprised of companies with similar approaches in the market. Here are some possibilities for determining similarities or dissimilarities. Next is an example that some of us should be able to identify with. Note the two dimensions, price and quality, versus geographic coverage. So Walmart has many locations accompanied by low price. Neiman Marcus has fewer locations accompanied by high price and high quality. This is important because it is used to determine who is actually one's competitor. In this case, we could say that only Target and Kohl's have true competitors in the five forces sense. This is illustrated by the overlapping circles. So Target would not want to waste advertising dollars competing with Neiman Marcus, but they would certainly want to use those dollars to compete against Walmart. In summary, we want to know who the true operators in a particular competitive space are. Understanding how a company differs from others impacts its operations within an industry, including the ability to capture opportunities, or as Weick puts it, to enact or create a reality.